Welcome to the Fatality Free Future podcast. I'm John Barclay.
My name is Holly Ferguson. This is the podcast where we explore the challenges and possibilities of creating a fatality-free future. Back in the studio today, we have Principal Consultant Alan Stevenson.
Good to be back.
Great to have you back.
Thank you.
We're tackling the subject today of Prestarts, and it's something that people might have seen you talking about on LinkedIn recently, Alan. And we want to talk about how these can be key for communicating messages about SIF. So starting off, groundwork. Prestarts are a meeting that are held, as it's in the name, before the day starts, pre-shift. Yep. And I want to start by asking what you think are the common pitfalls of these regular meetings.
I think that's one of the pitfalls is the routine aspect of them, Holly. So they've become embedded to the fabric of most organisations now, most mining organisations. Any site you go to, they'll have a pre-start meeting of some kind, and they can become a bit prescriptive and a bit mechanical. And then sometimes when I'm sitting and experiencing a pre-start meeting, it can be a very strange experience. Sometimes my perception is that it's just something that people have to do. You know, we have to do this. And then we can get on with the real work. So there's a bit of that. Sometimes there are people who really try and engage with the people in the room and have a conversation, have a discussion. But again, there's a reality of the situation that they can't spend too much time. They do have to get to work and start production. So there's a bit of a dichotomy. How much time do we spend? How much time should we spend? How much time could we spend? But, listen, we really have to get to work. So what's the most effective way to do that? And I think sometimes people try and put all their eggs in one basket and try and cover a lot in that pre-start meeting, whereas really focusing on, well, what's important? What do we really need to talk about today? And then what could we engage people in during the course of, for most people, it's a 12-hour shift.
Something I've noticed a lot is the pre-starts are a unique opportunity in an organisation where you've got everyone's attention for a certain period of time. So quite a lot of different parts of the business utilise that opportunity by putting information into a pre-start, and then starts to become a little bit bigger than it needs to be, and they're trying to achieve a lot, trying to do everything in the one session, so it becomes too much. I think also too, organisations, because it has become something that organisations use as a part of their safety strategy, that they grapple with the idea of, do we have everyone hear the one message at the one time? So therefore then you end up with a very large pre-start with potentially anywhere more than 50, 80 people in there. And I get that thinking, because it's like, well, everyone hears the one message at the one time. It's not getting different messages. So I sort of get why they like to do that. But again, that sort of stifles probably their main intent of a pre-start, which is to get the team ready for the day and get them engaged and get them working, get them thinking and talking and working towards the day, because it's very hard to engage people when there's 80-odd people.
I'm going to be slightly not politically correct. The popularity of the critical risk conversation just now, which has been around for a while, but for us it's just really provoked by legislation and various other things. So there's the opportunity to have that conversation about the critical risks, and a pitfall is that these critical risks can be accepted as, well, we just face the same critical risks every day. We're doing the same job every day. We're doing the same thing every day. So the pitfall is, how do I engage people in a conversation around critical risk when I'm just talking about the same thing, potentially talking about the same thing every day? So there's that aspect to it. But it's all going back to, what does the legislation require? The legislation requires in that identify the hazard, assess the risk, put the controls in place, review, communication and consultation. The pre-start meeting is the opportunity at the start of the day to communicate and consult. And that's not always what happens. There's a lot of broadcasting, not necessarily consulting. There's an attempt. There's an attempt, but sometimes the size of the room, the audience, the room itself, the acoustics. I was in one pre-start meeting a couple of weeks ago, big room, must have been close to 80, 90 people in the room. I was standing at the back of the room. The person who was facilitating the meeting was at the front, and I couldn't hear anything. I thought, is it me? Is it my age? Is my hearing going? And I looked at the person beside me. I said, can you hear that? And he went, and I said, excuse me, could you just speak a bit louder? We can't hear you at the back. That kind of thing. So there's the actual room itself, there's the environment. Sometimes people try and do pre-start meetings when there's machinery screaming in the background. And
so what's your advice then to get around that broadcasting and step more into engaging?
I think so. You have to have a smaller group of people. If you really want engagement, you have to have a smaller group of people. So there's the larger broadcasting event. We get everybody in the room. What's the key message? Is the one that we need to broadcast and inform people. It's an information session. But then how do I get a smaller group of people together, a smaller team, individual teams? So in this particular big pre-start meeting, there might have been 3 or 4 supervisors who then had teams. What would it take to have 5 minutes at the end of the big broadcasting information session to just then take that team aside and go, okay, how did we go yesterday? What do we need to pay attention to today? How can we help each other? What do you need from me? Right, so I think that's the way that I try and encourage people to do that. And I've noticed on some sites they do it. They have the big team meeting, and then they'll go off and have a little huddle with themselves, a little bit of a chat, and then off they go. That's the ideal thing. But just to make it more part of the culture, I think, and just get beyond, okay, what am I doing here? Is this information sharing? Okay, that's what I'm doing. Don't try and muddy it and pretend that you're engaging, because you're not. Have the engagement session with a smaller group of people who feel more comfortable to speak up and do all those things.
I think it's just really important to be clear on the purpose of what you're doing. So if you are doing one big session, what's the purpose of that? It's not everything. And if you're doing smaller sessions, then what's the purpose of that? I just think organisations should try to avoid doing everything in the one thing and actually start to think about the clear purpose of what that session is. So if you are going to have a big session, as Alan really well described there, is that's a broadcasting. That's about all you're really going to ever achieve. So what are the critical messages you need to give that team, that large audience, and then give them time to go off in their groups and their specific work teams to actually do what a typical pre-start description would be, which would be what's our work, what are our risks, how are we going to control them, how are we going to make sure it's work. But that's in the context today. And I think going back to something Alan said earlier at the start, when we talk about these things, they're a daily occurrence for people. So when it's a compliance-orientated engagement, which I mean, asking people what are your risks, what are your critical risks, what are your controls, when it's a compliance-orientated conversation, engagement, then it is very much the same thing every day. Teams, and I'll lean into the leaders who are facilitating these things, they really need to think about what do we need to talk about today that helps my team be set up for success today. And it may not be just rattling off all their critical risks and all their critical controls. It might be something that a challenge they're going to face today. The resources are down today because people are off doing training. Maybe specific bits of equipment are going to be offline for servicing. Let's actually have conversations about the restrictions, about the actual daily context in relation to the risks that they're trying to manage for today. When leaders do that, you can really see the team connect and engage in that conversation. As soon as it becomes a checklist-orientated conversation, you can see everyone start to check out.
Because they've heard it before.
Correct.
They have. And a classic that we see sometimes is there's been some significant incident somewhere, so they flash up the summary of the incident and then someone will read it line by line. And it's so boring. And it's a bit like being in a classroom. You just have to nod your head and say, and then of course, the classic, does anybody have any questions? Guess what? Not usually. They may have, but they just want this to be over. I just want it to be over. I want to get to work. I've had enough now. Right? It's 5:30 in the morning. It's 5:45 in the morning. All they want to do is get to work, or in the evening, if it's night shift.
And I just want to touch on another fact that I think, so we're talking a lot about the pre-start and the leaders themselves. I think the other thing I've recognised lately, having conversations with leaders, just to help them start thinking about that engagement process, is they get mixed messages from other people, so other leaders and other departments. And what I mean by that is they'll run a pre-start today. that's really engaging. They've had a conversation about what they need to have a conversation about. They've all talked about the things they needed to talk about. When the pre-start finishes, some other leader will come up and say, well, why didn't you talk about this, and why didn't you do this, and why didn't you read this bit out, and they're like, well, I didn't see that being really relevant today because I needed to talk about this. So I really feel the challenge for leaders, because they want to have these conversations with their teams, but then they're struck in this process that gets defined by the organisation, because for some reason they think we need to tell everyone exactly mechanically what to do with their teams, when really it's just define the purpose and let them go away and behave and engage and collaborate with their teams based on the purpose of that session, and give them the freedom. Today, the pre-start might be 20 minutes because there's a lot to talk about. There's lots of issues they need to sort out before they go out. Tomorrow, it might be 5 minutes because, hey, we're all on board. Everything went well yesterday. The planning conversation we spent 20 minutes on yesterday set us up for success. We don't envision any major changes today, so that's a 5-minute pre-start today. And I think we all get hung up on it needs to be the same thing every day, and we lose people because of that.
Look, we're highlighting a few of the pitfalls here, but we know ultimately that when done well, these are incredibly valuable meetings to be had. What are some ways that we can incorporate discussions around fatal risks that can be effective within these sessions, and not just, the same old message every day?
Give people not just the purpose, but I guess some high level structure, not just you need to say this and you need to talk about this, you need to ask this. I think just give them some high-level structure. So, we talk a lot about the conversation is an opportunity to learn as well, not just plan, but learn. So get the opportunity to have a conversation about how yesterday went. So reflect on yesterday. A leader who's really connected to their team and has spent good time with their team out in the field will also know what they probably need to reflect on as a team.
So this isn't necessarily a design for a pre-start, but it's something that I find really useful and valuable, and it comes from the military, right? And it's called an after-action review. And it's a really, really simple process, and I don't think there's any military organisation around the world that doesn't use it at some time. So after any exercise, whatever it is, they'll get the team together, whoever it is, and they'll go, what did we plan on doing? What went well? What didn't go so well? What have we learned that we can take into the next campaign or the next whatever it is? And when I introduce that to people on site, they go, oh, that sounds really simple. I said, yeah, it's simple. And all you're doing is asking those questions. So what did we plan? What was the plan today? What happened? How did it go? Did we meet the plan, not meet the plan? What did we learn? What can we take into the next shift or the next day or the next 24 and the next 48 or whatever it is, right? So it's all about learning, and it has the additional benefit of helping groups of people become teams of people. I think that's the other thing, because it's open consultation, it's communication, it's doing all of those things. So just that simple structure, and it can be adapted in various ways. But that's something that I talk to people about, and I say try it, practice it. The other thing I'll say to people, I said, so that little conversation you had, let's say it's a pre-start meeting, how was it for you? Did you find it interesting? And they went, well, no, not really. I said, so how do you think the people in the room felt? So it needs to be something interesting for you. So again, keep it simple, as John said. What's the purpose? What are the key things that we really, really need to talk about today? And I said, because of the popularity of the critical risk conversation, even they can be a little bit half-hearted. So someone will say, okay, critical risk today, working at heights. Can anybody give me some controls? And someone will throw out a couple of controls and I'll go, oh yeah, great, and then move on. Whereas we all know there are actually maybe between 10 and 12 critical controls for working at heights, but they're happy just to get 2 or 3 and then move on. So where's the learning in that? Where's the consultation in that? And that's a real opportunity that they can have. Then they do it later on when they go out and do critical control verifications and all that kind of stuff. I think it's just focusing on keeping it simple. I think too often the pre-start meeting becomes complicated, not complex, complicated, because they try and do too much. And we know our brain works on a first in, first out basis, or last in, last out basis. So whatever it is we talk about at the end, which is usually, okay, Holly, you're in truck number 2 today. John, you're in digger number 3. That's what you remember, and off you go. So there needs to be an opportunity to to check in later on. How did it go? What do you remember from the pre-start this morning? What about that? Let's have a conversation.
Yeah, we've got a formula for pre-starts, which can be a good guide for leaders to use, and it breaks the pre-start into different areas. So starting with reflection, then update, followed by activate, ending on motivate, and then an important part is to re-engage, which is part of what leaders need to do throughout the day. So talk to me through a bit about this process and why it works.
Again, for me, it's the simplicity of it, and there's a design to it. It can seem, if you look at how it's been designed, it can feel a little bit prescriptive, but it's all intended to create a space where there is conversation, right? So the reflection piece is about asking the people in the room, how do you think things went yesterday? How do you think? We think it may have gone a particular way. What do you think? And you'll get a response from some people in the room. And then you can have a bit of a conversation, and it can be a good day, it can be a bad day, it can be whatever it is. But the important thing is it's the people in the room who reflect on how things went, and do they feel that it went well or not. Then the update piece is to provide people with a little bit of an update around, this is what we're doing today, this is what's going on. These are some of the key things that we have to get done today that could involve the critical risk conversation. And then the activate bit is to begin to switch people on to what it is we're actually going to be going to do today, right? So that might be a bit of a conversation about, Holly, you're in truck 1, John, you're in digger 3, let's go, any issues, any concerns. And then the motivation bit at the end is to, and I've seen this done really well in some places, and they call them shout outs. And they'll say, okay, anybody in the room got a shout out for someone. And it's important for the leadership team to have some of those ready because the room might be a little bit quiet. And I've coached leadership teams when they have the little pre-start meeting is to be really aware of, so who, do you have any shout outs for anybody in the room? What have you heard? What did you see when you were out in the work area yesterday? But it's important that the people in the room, so you can have a supervisor to subordinate type shout out recognition, but the peer-to-peer recognition. I've seen that done really well, where people will recognise each other for a level of support that was provided. And then the final piece is re-engage. So you talk about things in the pre-start meeting, presumably because it's important for the operation that day. So your job is, whoever it is that's going into the field, your job is to recognise and re-engage people with that conversation. So we spoke about working at heights, critical risk. How is that going today? Outside of the routine compliance conversation of a critical control verification conversation, right? You can have that, but the most important thing is you're still in that learning. You're still being curious. You're still in that learning phase. So when you're being curious and you're asking questions of the other person, you're helping them learn, which is the key thing. And then you can reinforce key critical controls for critical risks and all of that kind of stuff. So that's the structure. It's a bit like the after-action review type thing, an adaptation of it. But the re-engagement piece is something that I don't always experience as done well. So they talk about something and I'll say, so we spoke about this morning at the pre-start meeting. What conversations have you had with anybody about that today? And I'll go, oh, what do you mean? I say, well, yeah.
And I think that's the bit we've been trying to make connections with leaders around this curiosity practice is going out and just checking on things is one thing, but sometimes you've had conversations with your team, framed things up with your team, whether it's in a pre-start or during a task planning risk assessment process, but you've had conversations with your team to go out and be intentional about the work. We then want leaders when they go out to go and engage with their teams again while work's happening. What is it from all of that are you curious about? What is it you want to know more about? What is it you want to confirm? What is it you want to see what's translated into actually work is done versus how we imagined it this morning? I think that's the whole point of that re-engage part. Organisations will create processes to get leaders to go re-engage, but leaders just need to actually do that as a part of their role anyway, right? Which is, we've set the day up, I've now gone and done some follow-up of my own work, now I need to go out in the field and see how it's going. From that morning conversation, is there anything you really do need to think about before you go out to have a conversation on what was different when we got out here? What did you experience when you came out and started that we didn't preempt this morning, and how did you manage that? What actually happened there? And I think going back to the structure, we've tried to keep it as simple as possible because it might seem, as Alan said, it might seem prescriptive, but it's actually not. Each one of those stages, you can make it your own. Like you can engage in a way that's up to you around learning, around what updates are needed, around how you're going to activate, what sort of things do you need to really activate today. And that motivation piece, everyone can do that differently. Like all those processes can become your own. They become very genuine and authentic, but it gives you a prompt of planning, how do I have this conversation this morning in a way that's going to get the best outcome based on the purpose.
And I'll just do a little plug that Alan has a little video series on YouTube and on LinkedIn where he goes into detail about each of these elements. Wrapping up, what are maybe 1 or 2 tips to keep pre-starts fresh? Keep them different every day if possible.
The first thing I'll say is this is your team, your work. You're accountable for the deliverables that's happening with your team. So have the conversations you need to have with your team using the process design as a way of just thinking about that conversation. So my main advice is do your own prep work around what is it I want my team to learn about. What is it I want my team to be updated or informed about? What is it I want to activate in my team today based on the work that they're about to go out and do today? And how do I keep recognising my team? Because your team, more often than not, is performing really well. So how do you keep that motivation and that recognition going? And how are you going to use that throughout the day just to reinforce or confirm or verify what's actually happening? I think if you can keep it that simple, I think most leaders will make that work for them.
And the other thing that I've spoken to some people on site, dependent on what they have available to them, what tools they have available to them. So one particular place I was at a few months before, they'd actually had ran little focus groups with the guys in the field about what good looks like. So they invited them. They got different groups, as I said, and they constructed this list of what good looks like. You know, what does a good day look like? And it took me a while, and they resisted for some reason. So they made this nice pie chart, and they put it up on the wall, this huge poster, and then it was hidden behind something. And I kept on saying, I said, why don't you refer back to what good looks like? Yeah. I said, so what was the point in doing all of that? This is something that the people in the front line have created. So let's have a bit of a conversation about, so how are we going? Don't use it every day. For example, new swing comes in, you have your first pre-start meeting of the swing, flash it up and go, this is what you said, what good looks like. How are we going? What do we need to focus on? This swing. And then halfway through the swing, where they might be switching over from day shift to night shift, how are we going? What do we need to focus on night shift? What do we need to do? So it's that engaging piece. So so I often refer to pulsing. So you're not going to have an amazing pre-start every day. You're not. But if you can have 2, 3, 4 over let's say a 2-week period, 2 or 3, 4 really engaging pre-start meetings, then you're setting yourself up for the whole thing. So yeah, there's going to be the mechanical, the routine aspect for some of them, most of them, but just focus on a few that you're really going to invest the time and spend the time and just engage people the way it's supposed to happen. That's what I try and suggest to people. And you can see the sense of relief. Mm-hmm. They go, oh, that's good to know.
And I think combining those two, one recent example where I saw a team and their leader just take that empowerment on of the pre-start being their pre-start. And it had been about a month or so since I'd been up there, and when I went up and saw them, it was one of the most enjoyable pre-starts I'd ever been to. Over the 20-odd years I've been there, there was lots of engagement, lots of conversation, not just with the leader and the team, but amongst the team. There was lots of laughing going on. There was lots of reflection going on. And it was really, really loud. Like, it was loud. And all other pre-starts in the area, you could see people being distracted by this pre-start.
Distracted or jealous?
Probably a bit of both. But you could see them getting distracted by this pre-start was so engaging. Was it like that every day? No, but it was over their sort of 3-week swing. It was probably like that at least 2 or 3 times a week Right. The other days it was a bit, no, we're all good, don't need to talk about anything, everything's fine. They have a bit of a laugh about a couple of things and then off they go. So I just think, be comfortable. It's yours. It needs to be what it needs to be. Lean into the team. What does the team really want to have a pre-start like? What does that really look like for them? And these were quite a very close-knit team, so they were, the team dynamic was really strong. So I think you just need to make it what you need it to be and just be comfortable with that. And my advice to other leaders who aren't running pre-starts, give them support, not direct instruction. Give people support around how to be more engaging and how to have more meaningful conversations. Don't tell them exactly what they should be saying and exactly what they should be reading out, because that just confuses people and then it takes the empowerment away. So just keep thinking about how you're empowering them to own their own pre-starts with their teams.
So sometimes you might see it as well, John. Sometimes we see the person running the pre-start sitting behind a desk. Right? So they'll be behind the desk and they'll facilitate, try and engage people sitting behind a desk, going through the pre-start sheet and point to the screen. The ones that have a bit more success are the ones that get up and stand in front of the room. And for me, that's a great way to engage people. So, and I get the protection of being behind the desk, but it's something that we encourage people. Don't sit behind the desk, stand up, get in front of the room. And then even sometimes people are more senior guys are sitting off to the side of the room and you hear them chipping up. They don't stand. Get up and engage. If you want to engage people, you have to stand up, get in front of the room and engage people. But some people need to get beyond that fear of public speaking, and we try and give them a little bit of coaching and facilitation skills rather than just running through the mechanics of a pre-start meeting. Sorry, it just popped in.
That's probably another podcast episode.
Yeah.
Very true. John and Alan, thank you very much. I'm sure we'll dive into this subject again in the near future.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Fatality Free Future podcast. Head to our Fatality Free Future hub on barclays.com for more information and to access everything we spoke about in this episode.